But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. We choose to go to the moon.
All right, welcome to World Blockchain Roundtable. This is episode 90 on censorship-resistant, decentralized cloud computing using blockchain. So our hosts for today are Lisa Mighty Davis, Team Mighty organizer and owner of the Mighty Lair, Greg from Rivet, Dave from Den Social. I am Master of Ceremonies, founder and architect of Dragon Chain, Joe. And Satoshi Sean might or might not appear out of the blue. So if he comes, we all know him. It's all great. So first, a quick update on the WBRT Lair ownership tokens NFT distribution from last week's episode. Each host last week will receive 88 lot. Each topic contributor will receive 33 lot. Last week's theme was weaponizing blockchains to fight against tyranny, nominated by I Am for I Am, who will receive 33 lot. Additionally, these ownership tokens come with perpetual passive income, free edits in the WBRT layer, and governance votes, most importantly, so that you can change formats on the show. So we also have, speaking of which, we have a DAO issue that is coming. So there's a March theme suggestions post. So you can reply by Monday with themes for the March shows, and the top ranked ones by vote by energy will be put into a governance issue for a final vote. There will be 5 themes in March, 5 weeks. How exciting. So theme of this week is censorship resistant decentralized cloud computing using blockchain, nominated by I Am for I Am. Is there anything about that we should cover and or go straight to current events? Because there's a lot going on, right? Greg is muted, unfortunately.
I was just going to say that for people who think that might be a mouthful, don't worry, it's actually a lot simpler than you think. So if you hear that string of verbiage and you think it veers most verbose, we'll stick around and definitely hang out for current events, but we'll explain it before we get started. And it's actually not that complex. You guys are going to get into this topic a lot easier than you think you will. And
both last week and this week are subjects that are probably based upon current events, already very valuable, important, and probably increasingly so.
Yeah, I unfortunately agree with that. It's becoming more necessary to develop stuff like this. Yeah.
Yesterday, during the some of the wild stuff on TV, the hearings, the Twitter hearings,
that was cool. That was actually so fun to watch.
The power went out, except it didn't go out in the hallway, and their powered microphones still worked, but the lights went off. And I, for the first time ever, got a notification that I tweeted too much. I exceeded my daily tweets.
Really?
And I saw a bunch of people
posting that. And then I stopped being able to DM. And then there was a big notice that Twitter, Facebook, and Insta were all down. Everybody was having trouble
DMing. That's
right. And it was all right when, they got called out for censorship. So did they go in and go, oh gosh, we got caught with our pants down. Hurry, go fix something. Push reset before they can go catch us.
Well, what I always wonder is, do you think there's this system that is able to send a signal to any computer and tell it to just to tell its kernel to panic for just a second. Just like a split second,
Like
it just
one
and all it's doing
computer
is
specifically?
sending that signal out to anybody who it detects a sensor hit
Yes,
on. Like
because
it's listening to you, and then it sends a signal, and boom,
we
your computer screws up.
we
If
had a
everybody
Twitter
was
Spaces
watching
the
that
other
Twitter
night.
hearing,
Mhm. Oh,
there would be a lot of computers with stuff you're not supposed to hear playing on them.
the other night we were
So-
on a Twitter Spaces, and I started talking about, or we started talking about Jack Mahler, and someone called him a 3-letter word starting with F and ending in D with a little E in the middle. And the host we all started getting muted. The host started getting muted. We were all like, what is happening? Like,
And you'd think calling someone a Freud would be okay.
yeah, I don't know. It was really weird. But I was
Yeah,
like,
stuff like that is weird. I don't know. It would be difficult for that to exist. But there has been things like that has
Algorithms.
existed.
Well,
Like,
I mean, when you think
even
about where they
speaking
were,
of-
right?
this isn't what you were talking about, but there absolutely is or was at least so you're familiar with Antminer, Bitmain as a company?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's a bug called it was like Antbleed or something.
Mhm. Oh, it was the
And
Heartbleed
Controversy.
chip.
It
Was
was
architecture
a back
flaw,
door.
basically.
It was a switch that that could be it could shut off all the miners from that manufacturer. Basically, it was something it came with every single Bitmain Antminer, and there's patches out there to, I don't know if it's still there or if you still have to patch it with new ones or what. But I remember this was 2018 or something whenever I patched mine. But it was a cutoff. I don't know what you call that. It's just a back door.
It's a kill switch in a
kill
back door.
a kill switch. Yeah.
So
Right, so
okay,
Well,
so that's the
technically
tech
what it
side.
is a chip level architecture flaw, right? That's what Heartbleed always was they basically designed this management and control system into these chips, probably at some government bureaucrat's behest, because they wanted to have like the perfect ability to spy on their employees and shut off their machines. And
I just
and
question
recover
the
if they wanted
network
to,
side, the viability of the communications side of it.
yeah, it's
But anyway, yeah. What we say?
if you build in the back door, right? If you build that back door in, it's going to get exploited, and it doesn't matter how secret you keep it. I think that's what that was.
I don't know if you've been ever worked on systems at major corporations. They will very often typically ask you, now if we need to do XYZ, that they're wanting a backdoor. And I don't know where it comes from, but it's happened to me multiple times that I've had that request, and I'm like, oh, okay. I mean,
well, that's like, I think it was Australia, or is Australia currently wanting to mandate backdoors and encryption, among other countries. And that's always the argument. It's like, we'll just put one in there for the good guys. The bad guys will never find it. The bad guys will never know about this.
Yeah.
We'll just put it in there for the good guys.
The funniest part about that stupid argument is, you would have to have an encryption standard that had the backdoor in, and it would have to be required by law to be used. So that if you got caught using another one, it would be problematic, right? But if they actually kept the key secret and somehow managed to keep that from getting exploited, there's nothing to stop somebody from encrypting what they encrypt into that. So unless they're going to spy on everybody's encryption all the time, they're never going to know if somebody's secretly encrypting.
Yeah, that's not the point.
Data they're sending over their conditional encryption.
Their point is that they know the encryption either already has backdoors, or any of the encryption that doesn't have backdoors is likely breakable if and when they want to break it. So they just want to hold it and also flag people who are using it, because why are they encrypting this? They must be doing something bad.
The goal is more to terrorize people out of trying to exercise their privacy rights.
Yeah.
So does this play into, speaking of current events, the Texas governor is banning TikTok statewide after the news of the floating balloon from China. We all have a little balloon from China in our hand.
So silly.
Spying. What are your thoughts on all that?
It's all theater. The whole freaking balloon thing, whether or not it's from China, who knows? But
right.
Yeah,
but
probably
whether
from
it's
China.
spying, who knows? But it's like oh, we shot it down. Come on.
I heard a plausible story about it. Let's play out in your heads. The balloon was a weather experiment. They were trying to measure weather, and because they built something shoddy or experimental, the atmospheric pressure based descent trigger failed, and the
They
balloon
can
just drifted
manipulate the
through the
weather,
trade
though.
winds to where it went.
They don't need to do experiments on weather because they have HARP.
What are the
Because like the balloon couldn't take pictures better than their spy satellites. The spy satellites get better fidelity. It made no sense for them to be using that balloon. And the
well,
idea
that's
that they
not
would want to, the idea that they would want to show people that this balloon tech using some kind of stunt is preposterous, because the balloon itself was A, not stealthy, B, not scary. It didn't actually get loaded up with any tech, right?
What was officially put out, whether or not you
Why would they
believe it was
aggress like
officially
that
put
on
out,
purpose? Oh, I
it was
don't.
not about satellite imagery. It was about wireless communications spying. It was more about cell signals and other emissions.
Right. But it could only send information
infrastructure.
that it would only be able to send information that it could receive. Right.
It was more
Sure,
about
I'm
an
just saying
EMP
it wasn't
threat.
about it
Just saying
wasn't
the goal
about
was to float
satellite
a
imagery
stinger
though.
over the country.
Yeah.
Like
They're
That makes
the
sense.
only
It
ones
was
allowed to do that. So they must be furious.
it was war driving, war flying, right?
yeah,
So
we're driving.
You better hope that you have good Wi-Fi if it flew over. It flew over Kansas City, so I was like,
Well, that's what I understand was the most logical purpose of it, was to make a map of the electronic space.
Oh, we didn't
like an
let,
EW type thing.
What
Oh,
was
okay.
under Trump? What was the what's the name of the Chinese company that had all the 5G?
Huawei.
Huawei.
So
Yeah.
Britain took it, but we were trying to convince them not to, and so we didn't take it. So,
Yeah, they already. The other thing was they already took care of that, though. You guys remember this, right? The tiny chips.
I mean, there's been several of those tiny chip things.
No. This is like something they put in every freaking chip at the factory where they made all the chips for a while.
Yeah.
Like they had if they have that in the country, then they've already got all the cell towers.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just
like they did
of,
this.
Yeah.
It's actually happened. They found the
Well,
chips.
I mean, the worst part about it is not even whatever type of nation state intrigue. The worst part is they own. They don't maybe. I'm sure they own all of the chips in all of our pockets, but the worst part is that they own all the politicians in all of our seats of power.
Right, they
So
own this NGO called Davos.
That's who makes the engineering decisions. So you got a good point there.
Yeah, they own the regulators. That's pretty clear.
Yep.
They own the policymakers. That's pretty clear. They own an executive branch. They own the legislators who aren't going to ever make any law for the tech to clear things up, or at least make a clear path to say, hey, we don't know yet, so it is all open, which would be the better way to go. Yeah, it's become a huge pile of crap, really.
Yeah,
so on that,
but it was a nice distraction for whatever they were trying to do and not be noticed doing.
Well, that's one thing. Is
Yeah,
I was surprised at how much attention it got.
Speaking
like
of which,
it could be a pretty straightforward story to talk about, but it got just like.
Speaking of which, it might be worthwhile
attention
every
off
time
the
we come up
Twitter
with
files here,
one of these current
coming up.
events. It might be worthwhile to say, okay, here's the current events. It is a shiny object which everyone is pointing to, which all of Twitter is going on about. What
The keys.
What is the actual thing that is happening?
I actually think I found it, guys.
You mean Hunter's friend?
It's definitely
with the
this.
More papers.
No, it's the fact that the U.S. got a leak, or there was a leak around the U.S. And the Nord Stream pipelines.
Was there?
There's a very thorough story talking about. Holy shit, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Well, that was another obvious thing, though, because Biden
Everybody already knew
and
that,
the
though.
press secretary are both publicly
you were in the
threatening
Navy.
to get rid of it.
But is this?
Dave, you were in the Navy.
recent?
Do you remember there was a station that had deep sea diver specialists located in Panama City?
I don't know about that. We didn't really operate around that area. We always went to the was it the Bahamas, that area? There's a big sonar testing field there. So we always went there for submarine or water stuff. I don't know about the Panama divers.
Okay, so this group was called. Hang on, I lost the article here. Some Substack journalist posted this while all this was going on. That was based on a leak, and there's some detail in this story, guys. Like, this isn't something that he could easily make up.
So this is something that was more recent that implied.
Essentially, what they did was they planted these explosives under the water in that thing when they did an exercise in undersea mine disablement, basically fighting against mines in naval context. They did war games with the Norwegian government, and that was when they sent this specialist team of divers under a special op directed by CIA instead of the Director of National Intelligence.
So
they
during
didn't have to report to Congress, right?
So they're saying that during a legit training exercise, they use that as a cover to say, well, while we're there anyway,
they planted
let's
remote
do this.
explosives that Biden could trigger by having them drop a sonar buoy.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. So
I
when
mean,
they
it was
exploded,
obviously.
that was.
What's up with the? Isn't there supposed to be an investigation of that by someone that we're supposed to hear about, or is that just like we're not going to talk about it ever again? Because that seems like something that eventually we should figure out what really happened there, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, if you
obviously
want
there
people
was
not to look at
explosives.
the water, you put something in the air. That's all I'm saying.
Obviously, it something blew up the pipeline in several places
Do you
intentionally.
think Europe would care about that? But
Yeah, they're probably gonna be pissed.
Yeah, and I'm sure they do. I just don't know.
Well, I mean,
how
the
much
media's
we're
of course
allowed to know
icing it
about
out, right? Like it's not being told about. So.
It's weird to me how common it's becoming for things to happen that we just accept that we're never going to know the real answer behind.
Yeah, there's a common. We should have this on Den more often. There's a common thread that occurs on 4chan that is memory hole thread, just to bring up stuff that's happened in the past 24 months. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
we never figured out what actually happened there.
Memory hole is a term for it. Yeah, just like keep the keys jingling over here now, over here now, over here now.
Yeah,
and I'm all like, I don't know.
I mean, the other stuff is the Pfizer stuff, which whether or not you believe the stuff with Veritas, but they threw James O'Keefe out, which is that was kind of crazy.
I saw that too. The fact that whistleblowers and journalists are commonly targeted by governments, even the U.S. government, and it's just like, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the crazy one, it's like, which is probably part of the point,
it's like, you guys watch. I didn't, of course, watch the Grammys, but the whole Luciferian thing is just kind of like, wait a minute,
but that was so blatant that it was like they've been doing that kind of stuff for years. It's been somewhat satanic, just not that blatant, that now they're making it like so obvious, like, hey, hello, dummy. Okay, we're going to make it this obvious for everyone that they're really satanic, and it's sponsored by who, brought to you by your favorite drug company. Like, that's where I'm just like, we have to be at the end of this show,
I don't actually care.
The low-hanging fruit at this point.
I don't care as much about, well, I definitely don't care about Satanism personally, but I don't care about, like, not that I don't care as much about whether or not
that was more of a political org anyway. It was never really they named it Satanism, but they're not actually worshiping Satan.
That depends on which one you're talking about.
He literally said, I can't wait to worship.
Well, they say Hail Satan, but it's more of a joke. Like the whole thing's more about exercising free speech.
Really.
That's how it's framed. It's also art. It's art. You freaking blood and semen and all that type of stuff.
It's a chaos op. I mean, they're just messing with people, I think.
I'm trying to figure out how to say what I mean without sounding like a total nihilist or something. But like with the Pfizer thing and the project, the Veritas thing, and all of these obviously documented things that people should be concerned about. I don't care as much about whether or not they're true. For example, the lab leak theory or the Pfizer covering up, research data to make sure that people don't know it's actually harmful for them. I don't actually care as much about those things being true as much as I care about people not wanting to know, I guess, is what I'm thinking. It's like just the lack of motivation or willingness to even consider it, dismissing it out of hand without even considering it. Completely, like in scientists too, like completely dismissing things because it was written by somebody they disagree
Well,
with politically, or because it's like, oh, I'm not even gonna.
The reason,
There's no way that that's even a possibility.
I know-
So let's not challenge it at all. Let's not do science on that.
yeah, and that's why I'll say, whether or not you are religious, whether or not you are spiritual, whether or not you believe any of that stuff, it is in the very least interesting because it's very obviously a programming. They've programmed in government schools the youth to be so pushed. They don't know anything about history. They don't know anything about what they need to know to prevent what they are trying to do. To just what would you normally be considered civics, right? They don't teach civics anymore.
Yeah.
None of that's happening. Nobody knows anything about the seats of government. Why? Because it's all a show anyway now, and the fewer people care about what's supposed to be there and what you have the rights to, the better for the people who have power. And so when you get into that stuff, it's just a purist demonstration that we have, who is we? I don't know, but like in Hollywood, we can do whatever the hell we want, and you guys aren't gonna be able to say anything, and we can throw it in your face and whatever else, because they know that middle America does not like that shit.
Right. No, I mean, that guy was being transgressive for the sake of it, and frankly, I've seen it executed better. I thought it was a really lame show, honestly. Like, who expects the Grammys to be good anymore?
Yeah, nothing in music's any good anymore. So, especially at the Grammys, the things that they're going to.
Well, there's a ton of good
see something
music.
satanic.
Just,
watch a Guar concert, right? That's freaking satanic.
The music industry that's a different conversation, but it's bifurcated into like the music industry and the music industry. Like there's different things, and this is related, I guess, to what we're here to talk about today, really, because whether or not we are descending into this dystopian future that we were warned about for, decades.
We are.
Even if we're like, okay,
we're there.
Either we are or we aren't.
Well, it's like, have you seen the meme?
And if we are,
a picture in a big city in the 20s. Yeah. And so if you were to bring modern culture to them, show them on a TV what's going on, this is dystopia. This is the thing that would scare the shit out.
Yeah, right.
Everybody's being watched by the government. I mean,
it's like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
We're afraid to say certain words when we talk to each other on a video.
We have to filter ourselves more than ChatGPT does.
Right.
Bank accounts, people's bank accounts are closed.
But you're allowed to praise the latest music performance by the artist that's favored by the current thing because that artist agreed to, put Ukrainian flag fireworks in the background of their show, right? And the second you start trying to go against it, the algorithm picks you up and silences you. Yep. If you want to scream into the void, say something transgressive.
I just figured out what it is. I just figured out what it is that bothers me the most, and it's this. It's even if we're wrong about that. Let's say we're wrong about that, right? Let's just for argument's sake that we're just conspiracy theorists and that's all baseless and it's totally bullshit, right?
It's not.
Let's just say. Still, though, where's the harm of developing more robust infrastructure, right?
It's the reason to.
The fact that people push back on things like even ivermectin, for example, that was one thing that pissed me off because even if it doesn't work, even if it has no effect, who fucking cares if somebody takes legitimately a safe drug that they think might help? People do it all the time.
Especially when the pandemic protocol involves experimentation on different early treatment options.
People are actually starting to be healed from cancer because
I don't care if that's true or not. I care that people don't want people to do something that's objectively safe.
Moreover, against the guidelines for how a pandemic is supposed to be operated by CDC's own rules. Like they literally threw the rule book out and changed it to this weird thing where they're going to tell doctors what to treat you with. When it used to be, hey, doctors, we need a solution. Find something magic. We don't care what you try.
But that carries over to what I'm saying about like encryption and decentralization and stuff too. Is like, okay, even if you don't believe in it or don't understand it, or you know that it's not for you or whatever, there's just so much pushback on like people just like to get mad at people for doing different shit.
And that's the thing. The whole world is set up for the theater. The reason for the theater is distraction. But essentially when you say, the people get mad for Joe Rogan having taken ivermectin. What do you think he had to sue CNN over it because they claimed that he took horse medicine? He said,
Right.
I was prescribed this.
My fucking
by a
doctor
doctor.
prescribed it.
Right.
Yeah.
And and
although honestly, I
how do I say
appreciated
it?
that because I was like, okay, I'm gonna go get some right guard or some heart guard now, so I can get some ivermectin. If
I published on DIN a while back what the nation of India, what their dosage, they were distributing ivermectin in their COVID kits with a specific dosage.
Yeah.
It was
Right?
originally
You know what I mean?
used.
It
in
won a Nobel
humans.
Prize
Yes.
Yeah.
for medicine in
Human
humans.
use.
Yeah.
And
Why?
so
why?
Whole
So
river
why?
blindness.
So why and who? Why and who? The why and the who are the same thing. Brought to you by Pfizer. This satanic thing or this this blood sacrifice over here, whatever the hell it is, that was a huge threat to them. If
But I think
people were
it-
getting
back-
well with this medicine over the counter, they're not going to make the billions that
Right.
they have, that their accountants
Right.
have
Well, I mean,
allotted.
actually
right?
would've
and I'm not
broken
saying
the
that that's
need for an
true, but I'm
emergency
saying
use
that that's not
authorization.
impossible. I'm saying
Yeah.
that the likelihood
And
of that being true is
I will tell you,
decently high.
I will tell you, if I had to start Dragon Chain again, if I had to start any significant mom and pop, if I'm gonna open up a business to have a taco truck or something, sure. But if I were to create another business that is a major, I would seriously be. I mean, I won't even say I would consider. I think I'd be stupid to start it here. Why? Because this country, the structure is set up so that anyone that might perceive your new tech to be a threat
Mhm.
is already going to have the funds and the wherewithal and the willingness and the pattern and the lawyers and the accountants to go freaking straight in and kill you. And they're going to kill
Right.
you somehow. They're either going to kill you on a tax
They're
Like
either
the
going to
killed
buy you or
library.
they're going to kill you.
side.
Yeah.
They're
Like
going to
the
make
killed
it
library,
illegal.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to sue the crap out of you. They're going to throw, and I, when I look back on it, we were sued for upwards of, is either 78 or I think it was $78 million early on by an exchange.
I bet it
because
won't ever be more
Yeah.
than 200 million.
Yeah, well, we beat them, right? And but all of this shit is a distraction over and over and over again. The SEC stuff, it's all just a distraction. And
Mhm.
I
Right.
would have to assume that it's money under the table somewhere.
How do you guys typically go about spotting distractions? Because when I see like theatrics, when I see somebody waving around a biblical symbol or using primary red in their set pieces, or anytime you see these things, like I feel like people need to talk more about that. Like
I don't want to get in
what
trouble
should
with
trigger in your brain? Holy shit! I shouldn't be watching this. I should see what they're trying to hide.
Well, anytime it's on more than one network, anytime it's national news, anytime. One of the big things is people at the scene with certain symbology. I'm not going to go into the details there, but there are certain people who are at the scene of any major accident that there's always a question. It's something odd.
It's a brand logo, and it starts with a silent P.
Well, some of it is legitimately capitalism trying to get to the story first, and this network's on it, so if we're not covering it, we're not as good as them. It's the sensationalization.
No, but I'm not saying that the networks
are
always the source of that. The event itself is often the source of it. They know it's going to be sensationalists if they do something. When I say they, if it's a distraction, if you believe that stuff, which it tends to be.
Clearly they don't give a shit about ratings.
Yeah.
They'll play whatever they're told.
It's ridiculous. So I don't know. Anyway,
all this shit's weird. It may or may not be, it may or may not be as bad as we think it is. Probably is, maybe not. But it doesn't hurt.
Probably worse.
It doesn't hurt to have a life vest. To have wear your belt and suspenders just in case one of them fails. That kind of thing. And so it's you could argue. It's easier to argue that these terrible things are fictional and untrue than it is to argue that they're not possible, right?
Yeah.
And increasingly probable, right?
Yeah.
So, like, even if you're someone who doesn't believe the head of R&D of Pfizer himself when he says it probably came from a lab leak, even if you're somebody who doesn't believe that and you're dismissing it, like, the rails for that to easily happen, like the infrastructure of corruption, the networks, the internal networks, the dialogue between people who make decisions and people who profit from them. All of that is in place to where like, oh shit, we better probably build shit that is resistant to that just in case that does happen, even if it isn't for another 20 years or something. Like, just in case, let's have some shit that works in case we need to use it. And so that's,
well, I mean, and even if you don't believe that's
my main thing, I think.
Point. Dave, I think that's a really good point. Even if you don't believe that stuff, you do believe in hackers, right? And the thing that makes hacking a system possible is the same thing that makes government intrusion possible. We just classify differently. Essentially, they're just a very well-funded malicious hacker that happens to also hold it over your head so that they can collect taxes from you, right? And that's pretty much what they're doing. And we'd call them a criminal hacking organization if they weren't the government.
Yeah. Can I tell you, we went to a cybersecurity conference at at university research group here 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And, it was interesting. And they had a group there that was doing some really, really cool work, really good tech. But they had a lot of people from FBI cybersecurity there, right? And a lot of times those guys, it was frustrating to me because it's obvious that some of them have no freaking technical clue what they're talking about. They're just paper pushers a lot of times. And nothing against them. But one of the guys actually said that he got his first PC ever. He'd always had Macs, right? And it was like, oh, he's a cybersecurity guy. Okay. So anyway,
poor bastard.
They were going over, and I asked the question, essentially, and they were specifically calling out how they handled finding and prosecuting ransomware attacks, right? And so I mentioned, isn't it interesting? Couldn't you just consider it a bounty? If I think it would be more effective and efficient, and you'd get a much better result if the law enforcement would tell all of these hospitals, like, get your shit together. It's not the hardest thing in the world. And the answer, which it does make sense, was well, you could have the best security in the world and somebody could still get in. And I wasn't able to retort, but if you have the best security in the world, they're going to go to the next freaking hospital, right? You're not going to be first.
Joe, the crazy thing is that none of them can, because the thing the government doesn't want to talk about is the fact that because of how they mandate billing be done at hospitals, they have to pump a freaking massive mega pipeline of data out of that place into central government repositories all day long. That is how they bill, right? Like, they have to prove to the government most of the time.
There are better ways to do that,
but you can improve it to the point. And what Joe was getting at is security 101. It was like one of the first things that I was taught in the military when I was being trained for security stuff was be the hard target. Just don't be the easiest target. Because they're going to go after what they have the best chance of getting.
If you're the only house on the block, although your windows could be broken, they could be cut into, although your locks could be picked easily. Any lock in America could be easily picked. Guess what? Someone who's going to rob you is going to go for the lock that isn't locked. They're going to just walk down the street and try it. And it's like, oh, I'll just go to the next one. Right. It's not worth it.
Yeah. So if you're just not lazy about stuff, you automatically become like your odds of being targeted, unless there's some specific reason, like nation state stuff, and like we need that.
Well, nation state stuff though is everybody now.
And the espionage
kind of has to act like
the second thing I asked them was, because they were mentioning crypto, the fact that the ransomware, they were tracing the Bitcoin. I said, like, that's all great and fine, but at what point, or what are you going to do when they use Monero? Because I can't believe that anybody serious who's doing that isn't just using Monero, right? It's an odd thing to me.
It's to the point where anytime I see something where they're asking for Bitcoin for something that's shady, I assume it's a sting. I assume.
And then they end up getting they get some of it back. And I'm like, that was a total setup, and that was their bounty that they got to keep.
If criminals are always
that was a government
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
McAfee was big on this. He would say, if criminals are always going to use the best tool for the job,
it's the private party contractors just doing practice for the product they're about to sell the government.
It could be, but I'm saying, like, anytime you see somebody asking for Bitcoin for some shit that's like obviously they should not be tracked and traced, it's got to be a honeypot, or they're idiots.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's why I mean,
what if it's literally federal agencies that are buying these services over Tor?
Well, they are. I mean, the feds have run the biggest exchanges for drugs. They've run the biggest exchanges for kiddie porn. We know this.
Yeah,
that is
absolutely. That's documented and declassified. Yeah.
You look at like 90%.
They're concentrating everybody into a digital camp, if you were.
90% of all the terrorists that they've caught were totally caught only because they set up the actual terror plot, right?
Right.
They bring people in.
The Whitmer
it's
thing,
horrible.
right? So is the FBI's plan.
So in that environment,
Yes.
how do you operate? How do you operate confidently?
Well, you need decentralization
as a person, as a company, as whatever.
Yes.
So as a webmaster, as anything.
Reason to build things. Yeah.
Right.
I got some video yesterday or day before yesterday from a friend of ours that he's from Nigeria. A lot of his family's still over there, and the banks there are closed and don't have any money. And there's huge riots in Nigeria, bloody riots, people in the streets. He sent video of these people fighting because the banks wouldn't give them money. Another guy was crying. Another guy was like falling in an open sewer. There's all this rioting in the streets in Nigeria. And then Twitter yesterday was geeking out and limiting everybody. And we were watching the power go out in the hearings in the Capitol, whatever. And I was thinking about, what you guys are always talking about, building, having parallel systems, all that. Like right now we are so dependent on they and the government, and our banking systems and our communication. But if the magical balloon does bring the EMP, where do we go? What do we do? How do we have those systems in place? Have we built those things? We do have Dragon Chain. Can we run that over radio or ham radio with a generator?
Right. And does your generator work?
Can we still connect to Wi-Fi because we've built a local net by putting radio antennas on our roofs?
What are those pieces that we need to do? I guess that's
that's the kind of stuff that's being it's a ways off from being like turnkey for people to use just as easy as like AWS or some shit like that. But or to sign up for it as easy as you would sign up for your local ISP, your internet service provider or something, But it's it's being built out, and it's going to be more important the more we face censorship, I guess, to simplify it, right?
Yeah.
But what Lisa was talking about also, having redundant parallel systems that are also redundant systems that are also available as a backup in case something goes south technologically or wartime, or if it's not an EMP, is it a solar flare? Is it a coronal mass injection? Stuff like that, where I don't know, like that would be super terrible, but also super interesting to see what would happen if we get a head-on CME again, like we do every couple hundred years, and what effect that'll have on the infrastructure today that everyone relies on for everything, for survival. We rely on communications networks now to survive, to eat, to
literally what the
procure
the solution to, right?
Yeah. So, well, I'll leave it at that, and we'll get into questions, I guess.
Okay. So, did we already refresh? If we did, okay, refresh questions. We go down to the first one, which is from Juicy J. Question: what are the challenges of censorship-resistant decentralized cloud computing other than scalability, complexity, and interoperability? So yeah, decentralized systems are difficult
Yeah.
to scale. Definitely.
Great
Complexity.
questions.
They are very complex. Interoperability. Different decentralized cloud computing systems may be compatible with each other.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of that is interoperability if they're focused on standards. The others, what do you guys think?
The important thing to remember about this, I think, is you're really talking about protocols, right? We're not talking about a single machine being hooked to another single machine with some kind of regular, available, existing connecting protocol, right? We may establish the connection that way in the programming setup, and that's why you need an internet connection to hook your node to the internet, right? But once you've got an open port, all you need is an available internet channel to get there, right? This is a different way of thinking about it. You actually have to design a protocol for how a swarm behaves, is what you have to design.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
a different animal altogether, right?
That's what I was going to say.
Once you conceptualize it like that, it's really easy to think about, though, right? Like, imagine you're running a company that's putting satellites in space, right? If you put up 1,000 satellites, then the more important thing is the coordination system. So why not make that the centerpiece? Make that how it runs even when there are just two, and make sure it's the same at any scale, and you take out that complexity.
Yeah, and another way of saying that might be easier to kind of like visualize in your mind or to conceptualize is if you think about the way that our systems are built traditionally today with centralized data centers that are professional, that are backed up, that have built-in generators, that have battery backups, that have, several different pipes, like connections to the internet in case one of them fails, all this redundancy built around a building, to make sure that if a customer is running their server on your cloud compute infrastructure, your centralized, your AWS, your Google Cloud, your whatever, that the hardware is actually controlled by like a single entity that hires a bunch of professional people who are trained in keeping them reliable and keeping them online and make sure they don't go offline and stuff like that. To design something like what we're talking about, you have to remove that reliability as what you're basing your services on, right? That you have to build something that assumes that the node is going to fail all the time. So like one of the projects that's building out this sort of decentralized cloud compute infrastructure, what they do is they want anybody from any device to be able to use their excess like CPU power to serve up compute for a customer that might want to run their website on their network, right? And so what they do is they assume that since we're dealing with people that are not professionals, they're hobbyists, enthusiasts, usually with just consumer grade hardware, maybe their old computer that's just in the closet now, and they don't have maybe even a battery backup, so it's going to go offline sometimes when they lose power. Yeah. So you have to start planning for that, knowing that the hardware that you're selling people, that you're selling people as a reliable infrastructure is based on unreliable hardware and operators. So you have to do things like from the protocol level and the coordination level, like Greg was talking about, you have to do things like duplicate like 5 times or so, like what's going on a server, so that when one goes offline, it can just hand off seamlessly to another one somewhere else.
You also have to bootstrap it with a bunch of reliable partners, because if you don't have friends that know how to do this going in with you, you're never going to get it off the ground, because you can't get it started off of hardware in a garage, right?
And that's what, so there's a different, so the one I was talking about, does it that way. There's another one that's taking what you're talking about, where you have reliable like data centers who are the only people that are allowed to produce.
Well, not saying the only, but the first for sure.
Definitely the first. Yeah. But anyway, so like, it's just to me, it's a fascinating engineering problem whenever you're designing on something where you're planning for it to dynamically fail at all the time. It's dynamically failing in different places, and you have to have it self-healing without a service interruption.
Right. We call this we call this the cattle not pets problem at Rivet. You need to have your servers presume failure, so that when one gets sick and it doesn't pass a health check, the solution is always close process, open a new server, right? And that's how you automate the troubleshooting. It's always shoot the cow, make an insurance claim, get another cow. It's not nurse it back to health because it's your beloved pet that your whole business depends on.
Yeah, and that's why, like say, stateless microservices are sometimes an answer to it, but because they can essentially start up anywhere. If you have a failure in one place, and in fact that they're even security.
Those stateless has
features.
some serious challenges with state management over time, because stateless really just means we're pushing state management to you or another service
or a blockchain, right? That's why it's like, if you have state somehow in a blockchain where you can prove that this is the state, then the actual servicing of a request doesn't have to initiate with a full session and with
but you may then have a situation where a state existed, but you don't know what its contents were, because whoever originally had or created the events that caused that state to be necessary to track, right? They're gone. They destroyed their state and quit the business. They tore down their machines, but the blockchain still has a record of it, right?
Yeah, well, that's
something else. Something else can pick up from the last.
So like statelessness though is like I said, a double-edged sword there, because what if a project had a whole bunch of people depending on it that want to get like their account balance when that last project was last running, right?
That's why that's what I'm saying. That's why if you have it on blockchain.
Well, I'm saying like if a blockchain is stateless, I thought you were talking about if a blockchain were running with a stateless.
I said
protocol.
atomic stateless services. Yeah, no, it's like the services themselves where you are interacting and potentially recording events from in output. That's what's stateless. Now there is an interesting question too, because a lot of times technical people will dive straight into a solution to this problem, and really, there are a lot of different solutions depending upon the problem. That if the problem is censorship of big tech, then it's relatively, it's not easy, but it's at least easier, because you're still going to be using standard internet protocols. You're going to be able to do a lot of other things. You might have to route them through Tor. You might have to route them through owned networks or other things. But
the routing
at
too
least you're still using that same. Now, if you're talking about something like a major event, sun event, mass ejection, in anything that would be a massive nuclear attack, something else. Then you're talking about, you might not have the availability of that internet pipe, so maybe you have to go, but you can still funnel it in. It will be a smaller pipe, but we talked about.
Post-apocalypse, right? You can go grab 3 computers that had it installed, connect them, and fire up your own local internet with them, and the protocol will start running again. Like you can restart it even after the apocalypse has ended. So.
And I guess that goes into what like Lisa was talking about, is how do you pick up the pieces, if there is a centralized infrastructure compromise or destruction or some sort of, like it gets turned off. And I guess that's it. You build a little network, and then you find somebody else that has also built a little network, and then you connect those 2 networks, and then you just start from there, rebuilding.
Yeah, because in Nigeria, I mean, it was like the minute the banks went down, like the people went to violence. And so like, how do we avoid that? And I think it is with communication, but we are so heavily dependent on the network, the internet, the Wi-Fi, the power.
That's why you still need physical things like gold and silver, right? Those don't go away because of this. Those just become a part of the overall package of what your wealth needs to look like if you want to have a collapse of civilization ready system that you can then build back onto the internet without setting up the same problems all over.
Well, my thing is like what I was talking about last week, which is that those are the systems and infrastructure that needs to be built now in relative peacetime compared to after everything's already burned down. You know what I mean?
Builders need to get there first.
Because if you've got
pretty intent on burning the world down, don't they?
Yeah.
Would something like the helium miners be a fix or a ladder out of that, or
Yeah, to an extent, yeah. That's a great project because that's a project that existed
Well, they're still
before.
using, aren't they still using existing infrastructure? They're just connecting you to it. Are they actually providing?
Yes and no. It depends on what you're
Extra?
talking about. So what they've got is two different networks. They've got the one that pays out in helium tokens, and they've got the one that pays out in mobile tokens. And so it is the mobile one is a 5G, decentralized 5G hotspot network, and that is routed over your normal ISP, your internet service,
Okay.
right? The helium network is a little bit different. That one is something they call LongFi that they've named, where it's a super low, it's an IoT network where you can have a node, a single transceiver that is on someone's rooftop that reaches miles in a radius of miles around that node. And so you can run an entire city on nodes like that with not Netflix, right? Not high bandwidth internet infrastructure, but communications that don't require a ton of bandwidth, like the scooters that you see that people can rent with their phones, or
your average RPC
something that could send RPC requests or like text messages or some kind of communications and stuff
but
like
it's
that.
Literally well, I don't want to say peer-to-peer, but is it literally not using the regular network at all?
Well, that's why I said yes and no.
Okay.
Because it is connecting through the regular internet, different disparate like locales, locations and stuff. But if you sever that, the location itself can operate within its own sphere. You know what I mean? Like a LAN. It's basically like
so I could
you have
talk
a
to
low.
I could talk to my neighbors with some app that doesn't exist. That's the problem, because no one would have any freaking ability to talk to each other over that network, because everything's going to go over.
That's the other issue. The third issue is, or however many we're on, which is that what's being built today is infrastructure for somebody who wants to then build a business based on that. Right. And so it's not necessarily like easy for anybody to pick up today and say, oh, I'm just going to text them on the helium network instead of my cell network. No, you got to have now a business that says, oh, this infrastructure exists. It's different from the other normal one.
Right.
I'm going to build a business based on that infrastructure and have products for people that's easy to use, Yeah. So that's where I think we are, is we're building out for builders that will eventually use it for something that's easy for the consumer to pick up off the shelf and use. A beeper. Right. Let's bring beepers back. An IoT beeper.
Dave, the other piece of that too is you have to companies that are on this have to be open to their customers about how they're doing things. It has to be like a feature of this product, right? We can't say that we're not doing anything to change the way the world works. We stand for these X, Y, or Z values, and we're going to hold them up, like free speech or whatever. Twitter is a great example. Elon Musk made it a free speech platform, and now he has to be held accountable to saying that, right? If he starts behaving unfree speechy, then he's going to get called out.
Twitter used to be
already happened a couple times.
Like low bandwidth SMS only kind of network.
My point is that these new businesses could still be evil, but even on a decentralized architecture. So like consumers also kind of have to pay more attention.
Yeah, any entity can be evil. It's just that when the entire infrastructure that every entity operates on is untrustworthy or isn't reliable for your business, because you might get it shut off for some arbitrary reason that isn't part of the official rule book, then you have
what happens when the FBI shows up with guns drawn and says, compromise this user's privacy because we want to spy on them. Right? What do you say as a business? Can you say no?
And if as a business you don't want to subject your customers to that, what do you do? Right.
Yeah, exactly. And the what do you do is a lot easier when the answer to their problem can't be, well, if you say no, then we're just going to publicly announce you as conspirators and go get you shut down with Amazon because that's where your servers are. Yeah. If they would try to do that on a decentralized infrastructure network.
This is, by the way, why
they wouldn't be able to find it.
And especially the culture around open source tech is so important, because these things will typically be built as experiments or as playthings, more likely than as businesses, because nobody's going to say, "Oh, I'll give you money, I'll invest in your company to build in the event that there's an EMP, so that people can communicate over this already very sparse network." It's never going to happen, right? But somebody could build that as a little experiment, and it would be kind of
whole space is R&D to not maybe like most of it anyway.
We've got something interesting coming up with that.
Is like, oh, could you do this in a different way? Does it work if you do it this way? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And we've seen Bitcoin obviously works very freaking well. And just taking that concept and applying it to different technologies is where it starts to get really freaking interesting.
Yep.
Because like Bitcoin is you can't shut it off money. There's nobody to point guns at to say turn it off.
Yep.
And conceptually.
Yes,
right.
conceptually.
They could
Yeah.
they could find
And-
all of the miners, and they would have to spy on everyone, and they'd have to break the law to do it. But
when I say Bitcoin,
China?
I'm talking about I'm talking
It'd
about
be hard.
decentralized cryptocurrencies. I'm talking about Bitcoin. I'm talking about
Okay.
Monero. I'm talking about
Okay.
just Bitcoin
Right.
as something
Yeah,
to call it.
something, something.
But then, but that's
decentralized crypto.
that's a relatively easy one because you can turn shit off and on without corrupting data and having to have a particular state that you recover from. The trick, I guess, is like applying that to things that where that does matter, where you do need to know where your communications let off and what state it was in and how reliable it is and stuff like that.
Right.
Which is where the cloud compute thing is super experimental right now.
Yeah. And that, it's really hard to create a kind of shared runtime for operations that require millisecond precision, that's very
You're not
hard
going
to
to get that most likely in this. I mean,
Right,
I would say
yeah.
most of these systems that we're talking about to go to his answer. I mean, it's more than just the scalability and interop and all that, because I mean, interop right now is probably non-existent. I mean, if you're talking about those types of networks that we were talking about, I mean,
Right. Now, if you are talking
special
about
apps.
if you're talking about like node infrastructure, it's a different story. Because that's what we're working on. And what we've been able to construct is a really simple piece of open source software that just needs a network to connect to and a turnkey revenue collection system.
That's
and
important.
You can have APIs doing the payments. You don't even need, you can just have your computer negotiate with the market for the best price.
And that's the issue, that if some major event happens, and it could be, could be the government, depending on where you are in the world, most places, it could be some act of God, something that's totally unexpected. But getting that network back up to any degree is going to be, kind of the long pole in the tent. There's, you can't really do much until you have the ability to connect those things. So,
are you
that's
familiar?
a huge one.
Now,
And then
the
scalability
might be a good answer.
But then you get into scalability, and it totally depends upon that infrastructure. It's really hard.
We take for granted the infrastructure that we have today. The low latency, high bandwidth, reliable infrastructure that we have today.
Yep.
But have you heard of there's a bunch of stuff that people are trying out now, the old ideas are new again kind of thing, where
there are no new ideas.
Are you familiar with Briar? I was going to talk about Briar as a messaging app. Have any of you heard of Briar?
I've not heard of Briar, but I have one that I imagine might be similar to share with you guys too. What's
so Briar is extremely interesting. I first heard about it. They were using it in Ukraine before Starlink came through and helped them out over there. They're using it a little bit in like Australia, New Zealand, but it's an app on your phone. It's a messaging app, and it doesn't use the internet. It doesn't use your cell like infrastructure. It uses near field, or it uses Wi-Fi, local Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi, peer-to-peer connections. And so how it sort of works is like human activity day to day. You go to work, you go to the park, you go to the grocery store, whatever. You interact with different people around you. And so if I wanted to send a message to you, you're, across country or something. If I send it through Briar, it might not get to you for a week, for a month. right?
Oh, cool.
But eventually it'll propagate across random people who happen to like walk by each other, where it passes messages
That's
off.
awesome.
So it
You know,
blinks
that kind of thing.
on
It's
when
like,
you're in range of an actual host, and otherwise it's just waiting with in a passive state waiting.
If you
game.
guys
so-
have ever looked into how
That's cool.
ancient messages used to be communicated, is very similar to that.
Yep.
It's very super interesting. You'd have to, like, you might pay a merchant who's going to be going from port to port, who
Yeah.
then has to pay someone else out of what you paid him to get it to the next step. It's kind of
I was talking to
interesting.
somebody about that recently, and they brought up, and I hadn't even thought about this, but they were like, yeah, well, what if you just like give it to the mailman, the postal service? The mailman's
Yeah.
driving around to everyone's mailbox. And then if it's just Wi-Fi, you know, every house you come across has a Wi-Fi hotspot. You're dropping mail, but you're also exchanging messages from this peer-to-peer app. You know, so that could be one way that we, you know, bootstrap a new infrastructure. And that stuff's that's today. That exists today, which is pretty cool.
Pigeons.
There was one.
Actually,
Station
there's a pigeon protocol. You guys know that? IP over carrier pigeon.
Yep.
You can actually run the internet.
That's the thing. Everybody's always heard the story, if you've ever been in computer science or anything else, that there was a professor that challenged the students on the never doubt the bandwidth of a station wagon, right? The fact that he could carry radical amounts of data from one town to another, where at the time it would have taken days, weeks, months to transmit over the best available internet, and with the station wagon it was 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, moving that data. It's just an interesting thing because it's physical.
We've done stuff like that too, where like we used to we would have crates full of hard drives, basically, where like we need to get it from point A to point B, and it's literally just faster to put them in a crate and drive them for like 16 hours to get there than it is to just transmit it over the internet.
Wow, because it's that much data to send. That's wild to think of. There was a project called Bravo, I think it was called. Kenny Bozak wore a node to the Litecoin Summit one year, and he was like, come by and scan my node and you'll get Bravo coin if you have. And what they were doing is they were trying to replace or disrupt Yelp, because you get such bad reviews on Yelp and it would destroy people's businesses, but a lot of them were fake reviews. So it was like proof of actually physically being there.
Bravo's dope. I used Bravo. I reviewed like a bunch of stuff on Bravo.
I think it quit though, didn't it?
I don't know. I think so too. I have to look it up. My app doesn't work. I don't know if it's because it's not updated or because it shut down.
I tried to reach out to them about partnering with another project, and I couldn't get anybody on Twitter.
Yelp
that's
should
one
buy
of those
it
things
to stay relevant.
Yes, it would be a great, become the next thing. It's like how Instagram started doing, the Reels thing or whatever. Like, do the next thing and make your product better.
Have you guys seen Noster yet? Have you seen Noster? Nodes openly sending text records. It's an acronym.
Nodes openly sending.
Nodes and other stuff.
Nodes and other stuff. Oh man, I got the acronym wrong. Sweet, but still, it's an acronym. And you can set up the app. There's an iOS app that's really pretty slick, that actually looks almost identical with current Twitter. Really promising. Still got some quirks because it's very, very new. It just got banned in China because the CCP was threatened by it.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. It's like if you the four of us live in the USA. And so a lot of times we talk about things that are like, is that happening here? Is that not happening here? Mm-hmm. It might be a better exercise to just talk about where we know it's happening. You know what I mean? Yep. Like, how do you maintain a reliable censorship-resistant network in China, in North Korea, in, like places where like, okay, it's no longer an argument of whether or not we need it here, because it absolutely exists there. So how do you help those people? How do you help people in Iran who are being targeted and killed and assassinated because they went to a protest, because they spoke up and said, I don't like this, and so now their life is in danger.
That's actually a good point to make, because it is essentially what it would boil down to here if it happened. So it's kind of the same answer for both, which I guarantee to you it's going to just literally be the simplest, most standardized, most commodity tech available. That is, like say the biggest boon to people in North Korea, for example, has been the fact that storage devices are so tiny that they can now put them in some part of their body and cross borders, get data in or out. Like they're bringing
people float them over on literally little balloons.
I think they're bringing in movies, sadly, which is probably not good for them. But they're at least bringing movies back out that are what's going on there, right? But
that's been going on. The film thing's been going on for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Because they were doing that when I was in the Navy. Still, I remember reading about that, where they were sending from South Korea. They were just sending balloons over with thumb drives, with different media, different stuff on them. But yeah, those are real world examples that we can then engineer to, use them as an example of like, well, we don't want that to happen. So just in case, how do we build around that kind of thing? And encryption is important. And I hope low bandwidth comes back. You know what I mean? Because right now it's kind of like, I play video games a lot, and video games get more and more power hungry. They need more and more compute power because it's prettier, because the physics are more real. It's neat and it's fun. But like the games themselves aren't as good sometimes anymore if you rely just on that.
Well, I mean, No Man's Sky is such an exception too, because they did that with such little compute. Like that system is largely procedurally generated. That's how the future of like high def graphics and environments ought to be, right? Because you don't have to send very much to build a universe.
Yeah, because what they did is they built it based on procedural generation. So instead of pre-building everything, you just build it on the fly in the game. And the same thing, not the same thing, but a similar concept. There's a network called Matrix that I've been looking into quite a bit. And they're doing something super interesting because one of their focuses, besides encryption and redundancy and reliability, is low bandwidth. They want to facilitate super duper low bandwidth networks. You know what I mean? Like in the hundreds of bits per second range, so that you can reliably send messaging data throughput. So like. Yeah, people are building up stuff like that where they're like, okay, what if it doesn't matter so much if it's fast, instant, high bandwidth, that kind of thing, broadband? What if it just needs to be reliable, private, and accessible and interoperable? And we don't actually care about the necessarily the latency or the bandwidth anymore. And I think those are probably the first things that are going to work really fucking well, to where then that's iterated upon. We get, the same thing with high bandwidth later, maybe.
Yeah. Hyde Freak brings up people don't have any idea how much data they're actually consuming every day. And, and that's true because like say, you look at systems even 10, let alone 20 years ago, they had so little RAM or resources to use. So everything was looked at and fine tooth comb when it was being coded. Now it's radically sloppy on top of radically sloppy on top of radically sloppy, which is also why there are so many bugs and so many programs, by the way, because it's layer after layer of abstraction that often poorly constructed. And things happen. So
well, and when you compare like the ridiculous, like you said, the ridiculously small amount of data that is being interacted with every day, to the huge amount of information that you get from your brain's sensorium, right? Like from your eyes and your ears and your nose, like living in the world. A very low throughput processor, your brain handles all of the things you're seeing right now. Right.
Better design.
And it does so much better than any of the games that we have, that we are clearly missing something. There's got to be something we can figure out to do this low power, low throughput, and still have a rich experience built in. It's got to be possible.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Jacob Wayne. Do you think it's important for normies to understand a little bit about censorship-resistant decentralized blockchain technologies?
Yes.
Once we are all using them, or do you think it shouldn't matter for them as they utilize these applications with easy to use interfaces. I have an answer, but what do you guys think?
I think everybody should know about this, like not even just because it'll help you understand how to use the systems, but because in order to understand it, you have to start to learn to think about what kind of threats there are in the world that want to exploit your data, like they want to exploit you. How can you be used without you knowing it is a question that has always sort of stuck in my mind once I figured out that was happening anywhere to anyone at any time. I never figured, surely they're going to care what I think or come after me for it. But I was always like, if I were being pursued by somebody who was using my digital footprint to screw with me or to send my life down a different path or whatever, right? How would I know and how would I stop it if I didn't like where they wanted to send me? Right. Like, and that's the first question that I think we all ask, right? What is this doing to me? It leads to how are they doing it to me? Leads to how can I stop it? And that's where this censorship resistance thing comes in, right? You put encryption on a network and you make sure that network is distributed in a way that doesn't require permission. And then you make it easy for a lot of people to play along. And it becomes way too much like, killing the civilization to save your hegemony over it. That's when the balance tips, right? If you have to go shut down everybody's internet connection or be in their living room with a gun 24/7 to prevent this network from existing.
Sounds kind of like mutually assured destruction as a strategy.
Right.
Not in a nuclear way, but
they can't arrest us all because
way.
we only have prisons, right? And that's the notion that this plays on. And that's why I think everybody needs to know it, regardless of whether or not you need to know it necessarily to use a service that still works.
Yeah. I used to think so. I disagree today. I used to think it was really important to try to talk to people and get them to understand why it's important and why they should care about it. But I kind of just ran out of breath. I turned blue and said, okay, fuck it. People don't care. So I think, my answer to that would be that it probably is going to rely on, like, people are just going to use a service or an app or whatever. And what they're going to notice is, oh, this one seems to work better than that one. I don't know why, it just does. So I'm going to buy that. It's like, oh, I like Verizon over AT&T because in my area, I can get better service. It's more reliable or something.
And that is kind of this. I'll come in as maybe a hybrid on that. I'd say for the betterment of society, it would be great if everyone knew how to code and used Linux and didn't use Windows, right? And didn't do things that make it worse for all of us, right?
Refused to use Windows, even better.
People are apathetic. People are lazy. People are oftentimes stupid. People oftentimes don't give a shit about that stuff. They have their life, and I think too, right? The powers that be have geared it so that they are so overwhelmed by just working their two jobs, getting their kids to school and fed, that there's no way they're ever going to pick up that stuff. So I think it is very, very, very necessary to say, essentially, I mean, if you had an app that was written in a censorship resistant way, maybe ideally it runs over the internet now, but it will work even if you are outside of the bounds of a normal network, just because it's using some other protocol. That's better. And it would be great if grandma didn't know that it was doing that. And when the solar flare hits and all of the neighbors can't talk to their families, but grandma can, she doesn't know why. And frankly, it doesn't matter. It's just that it works, right? So ideally, grandma would be using Linux and would know how to set up shit when stuff, and how to tell
people don't even know how their
grandmas do
credit
that.
card
My
works
grandma
now.
knows this stuff,
and that's the thing. It's so funny because a lot of people will say, "Oh, but it's so complicated. People never going to use it." But
they don't have to know how
money exactly. You know how money works in normal. People don't care. They don't know. It's bad that they don't know. Frankly,
right?
They're in a trap. Right. We all know they're in a trap, but they don't have to know when something is good either. So it's weird because society, say the powers that be, governments, whoever else has allowed the banks to set this up in a way that it's just programmed into people people don't know economics. The government schools don't teach you about fiat currency, and it blows people's minds when they learn that, right?
People don't even know that the Austrian school exists, right? Like when they major in economics, like you have to go to graduate school and maybe run across somebody else who's insisting upon writing about it,
and put your grades at risk
Mises in econ majors.
Right? And literally put your grades at risk in most cases, or stuff like that, right? So. Yeah.
I agree with you, Joe. I think you're right. I think there needs to be a bit of both, right? Like we need to design systems that are secure out of the gate. So all the defaults are for security that protect people who don't know what the hell's going on, but that we still ought to try to teach them anyway. They shouldn't have to know in order to use it safely, but they should have to know if they're willing to open their ears a little bit.
Well, I think that's more of even a civics thing. Frankly,
before
they know to answer it, they should know that there is this issue, and it's a lot of people getting awakened by a lot of what's been going on recent years. Because
I mean, the trucker thing was a big one. I think I think all of Canada is now a hotbed of amateur security experts.
Yeah, the trucker thing was, and Lisa brought up a point about ham radio, and I was just talking in chat about, during Arab Spring, when several Arab countries were seeing these, protests with their populations. A lot of them cut off the internet. They just turned off the internet, stop coordinating, stop being able to communicate with each other, so that you're not as organized against your government, that kind of thing. And what we saw in Egypt, at least in Egypt, maybe elsewhere too. But I specifically remember them running comms over ham radio, linking disconnected networks together. And it wasn't like the people that were communicating over ham were ham operators. It was ham operators saying, no, use my infrastructure for your pre-existing app. Just run, connect to me as your ISP, and I'll handle on the back end connecting, these disconnected cities together, that kind of thing.
And that's one more thing to bring into it that I haven't even kept up with this at all. I've not even looked into it for years and years, but software defined radio, where you can literally mimic any radio protocol with software now. And there are a bunch of them that work and that have been tested to really high bandwidth. They've done 4K streams over it and everything else. It's crazy interesting, because that could be a big piece of this, because you could plug that in. You could even do encryption, peer-to-peer. You could do all types of stuff that would be anti-censorship.
Or just the encoding, like LivePeer does. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's neat stuff, and I wish I had more time to.
I learned about that stuff primarily. I used to be way more into like security stuff, like going to conferences and things like that. And there's almost always like a Wi-Fi village with a bunch of people with SDRs and stuff. How to exploit wireless communications and set signals and stuff like that. And then like what you mentioned earlier, Joe, about how easy locks are to pick. There's always a lock picking village to teach people like, here's how you pick a lock and here's how you make it easy, that kind of thing.
The simplest lock, it makes it obvious, right? Like the shape of the key is implied by the lock. If you can look in and inspect it, you can learn how to fake it.
So it's fascinating to see how advanced a lot of these tools are whenever you attend. Now they're not the cheapest. They're usually $200-$300, to go attend these conferences, but it's a very good snapshot of like what's being worked on today. How vulnerable shit really is today.
That'd get a lot weirder too with the conversant AI situation.
Sure, yeah. I'm looking forward to see all the talks coming out on that.
Everybody's kind of astounded by that. By the way, I called this shit in 2013, and the people in my workplace, I shit you not, laughed me out of the room every time I brought it up. I told them that by before 2025, there would be an AI that could write legislation.
Yeah.
Well,
I won like 15 bets that I'm never going to go collect.
I'm not gonna say anything offensive, but I think we could probably write legislation with much less than today's value of AI.
Right. Well, I mean, it doesn't take much, but like, okay, so actually, I got to go in a little more detail. They have internal jargon at these places that does get shared sparsely over the internet between people that work at the place. like what a bill draft is named or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
has a particular encoding. They'll call it like, for instance, in Indiana, it's LS and then a number, and that's a reference to a bill draft, right? You can use the jargon that you use when you order one of those from one of the people in the office, right? When you say, hey, I'm a legislator, I need you to write this change to the law that does this. Please send me an LS for review. If you ask the chatbot to build you one, it will.
Oh yeah.
It's freaking nuts.
Yeah, those things. That's something that the scientific community is really like trying to figure out how to deal with right now. And I just see that through my wife's industry, dealing with people that write papers for a living, or that peer review papers, or that, like the ability for a bot to produce a properly formatted document that meets the criteria of how you write a particular thing for it to get accepted. You can look at it as cheating, or you can look at it as a really good tool to use.
Yeah, it just made everybody
to make sure you do it right or something.
It passed the bar exam, for instance, in New York, I think, or maybe not New York, maybe it was California. I'm not sure which state, but the point is it passed a bar exam. So imagine a tool where like people could access the law because they pay the lawyer's rate as it stands, but they only need 15 minutes of their time because they're just reviewing the things that they're being instructed to create with the AI, right? Yeah. And the lawyer relationship is more coaching people on how to access the universal free expert, right? Like,
you could use it as an intern. Just
to me, that's
hey,
a
do this,
thing.
and then
I still think they need to start codifying law in a better way, a little more transparently.
Yeah.
Right? The way it is just trash. It
needs to be on public blockchain is what it needs to be on.
Yeah. And there is, gosh, let's just go to the next question. There's one more thing to bring in, but anyway, I am for I am dystopian context. What if we woke up and found ourselves living in a very dystopian world, like China or North Korea, or like the Western world right now? If when CBDCs become the norm, we will need another way to communicate with each other outside of the state. We would need to have an underground communication network. We would also need repositories that can preserve our history, and the governments could not change or delete. Immutability, such a network can exist that a government couldn't take down, or can as such a network exist, which would be whack-a-mole safe. Are we really talking about another internet that's going to be required? Is blockchain in this context even the correct solution? What do you guys think?
I think that's a really great question. And I'd say, yes, they do exist because we have an example in dark markets with Tor. They took down the first Silk Road. They found the Dread Pirate Roberts, and they put a man who did not deserve anything but maybe a slap on the wrist, maybe a medal, but a slap on the wrist in a society that wants to punish that, right? A fine, community service. That would have been the requirement for anybody else who did something like that. But he put up a persistent threat, open source, that then became the next dark market, and the one after that, and the one after that. You can still go on there and get ivermectin and abortion pills all day long, along with anything else you want, because he created this repeatable model, right? So it does exist. The dystopia can't shut them down.
Well, it still relies on people's ability to access the internet in the first place, though. And the internet being, like, I've got one option for the internet where I live. You know what I mean? And so if I was not allowed
the internet too,
yeah, they do. But if I wasn't allowed to access it, or if it burned down, I feel like that's where this question's coming from.
See, I see this more of a question of like, what would you do in a place where they set it up but want to police it pretty heavily? Because you use China's.
But if he's talking about, I mean, I don't know. I would consider it like, say, I am watching with the family, Last of Us, and it's something like that. I mean, you're talking about a lot of physical. At some point, some of these things become too expensive for society to even consider. Like if you're just trying to eat, you're not going to worry about peer-to-peer encryption.
What we really need are rootkits for old cell phones so that we can charge them up, root them, throw them out in the open with a little solar collector on them, and they can rebroadcast internet forever, right? Like,
Yeah,
we
if
so
we
much
have,
e-waste, we could repurpose them as just disposable. Like, we
there's
could
a
toss them
bunch of
around.
stuff that you could do while we still have infrastructure and while we still have industry creating cheap silicon and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Waking up one day in North Korea and then trying to procure equipment to be able to communicate, that's a different story, you know, altogether.
It doesn't have to be in North Korea or China. Yesterday,
It's
so
already playing like that here.
day before yesterday, England came out and said, we plan to be a CBDCs no later than 2030, I think. And then yesterday, they announced their CBDC is coming out or is out, and you can't hold more than 10,000 to 20,000 pounds
You
individually.
know, I did read something about that. There was limits on how much you're allowed to have at one time.
Yeah.
That's
you know,
terrible.
You know,
Those
and
people need to reject it.
there's already arbitrary limits on how much money you're allowed to carry. Like if you got on an airplane with a suitcase full of cash because it's yours because you worked for 20 years to earn it.
You
And
can
so
get
now
stopped by a police officer, and if you have too much cash and can't explain it, they can just take it from you.
Well, that's today.
Right.
That's
Well, they can do
that's
that
already
anyway.
today.
Here.
That's the thing
Here.
that like I've experienced that with, you know. Anyway, cops can
the
take
thing
things
to remember, I
and
think,
be
though,
like if you got $10,000, they'll confiscate it because it's suspicious. And then even if you fight back and get your money back, they'll be like, "Oh, sorry, here's your $7,000 back."
right.
You know,
And-
it's just like it sucks that's who you have to worry about, and there's no
Right.
accountability. And so if they can
Well,
do it
and,
with cash,
and frankly, leave your cash at home, man. That's what
if
people
they can
need
do it
to
with cash, and a CBDC is digital cash,
Mhm.
right, by their standards, then you can do it with that. You know,
You
and
can
if
do
you can
anything.
control, you can do anything they want. It's programmable money, right?
They went in. I mean, they went in and robbed hundreds of safety deposit boxes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was a year ago. I mean,
Right. And the U.S. government
And
is
celebrated it.
actually
Like, look
kind
what-
of less heavy-handed than the Brit government. Like, those guys are assholes to their citizens.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, you know, whenever you have more of a focus on the little guy than the big guy, that's where it really becomes, to me, that's the turning point
Yeah.
into dystopia, is where you have, you know, the policing is more heavily done on the
So how do we
average
fight it?
person
and
than it
it's
is.
so
question, I
pigeonholed
think.
too, because we can't we can't carry around cash or certain types of plants here, and we can't. How do I say? Overseas, they can't have pepes, right? I mean, that's one thing. I have my wallet stacked up with pepes to trade, right? So I can trade for
Yeah.
eggs now. But rare ones, only rare ones. But I can break a piece off of it, so it's not the exchange rate's pretty good. But I can't have a Kinder egg, a surprise egg. I cannot have a Kinder surprise egg over here, which I think is.
Yeah, you can, but it's not like a real. It doesn't have a choking hazard in it.
I know in Germany you
make a new
can't. I know in Germany you can't even say the thing that needs to be said, right? Which is,
Oh boy.
taking that CBDC
Oh, okay.
is
All right.
like saying,
thought
yes,
you were gonna get us banned.
load me onto this train car. Seriously, this is the end of it. This is you implement this system and everybody adopts it. We are all under permanent surveillance. That's that. Then they don't have to be polite about it anymore.
Well, that's
Yep.
in line with decentralized infrastructure and the necessity for it. Because if you have only one option, and it is a centralized government controlled, or depending on what you consider to be the government, people that run shit controlled, and you don't have another option, then that's where the danger is. Having
Right.
something that's terrible like that, but also having other options that are readily available is a much less scary scenario.
Yeah. And how do you fight it?
Well-
Solutions possible. I mean, I think you pretty much need to be, which most of the people listening probably are, be the person on your block who at least has the level of technical know-how to try to reconnect things when things go bad,
Yeah.
or to
Well,
I was always the guy that they would come to when they were asking about crypto. None of them would listen to me way back, but it was still, I would tell them, yeah, you don't want to regulate it. You don't. This is what it's for. This is why it's interesting.
yeah.
And other than that, fight CBDCs while you still have a chance to fight
Right.
CBDCs.
Oh, yeah.
There's
Fight like hell on that one.
entirely possible that they won't get created. It's happened
You think
enough
so?
that they've put
They
up
refuse to use it.
Now the banking world is different than
I
a
was going
lot
to
of
say
these
they're
things.
already creating those multi CBDC trading platforms, and Davos just rolled out a week or two ago the scariest one of all. That's the multi CBDC, and it engages with stable coins. So you don't have to hold the cryptocurrency. The business could hold the cryptocurrency and incur the gas fees, and then pass those on in stable coin to the customer or whatever.
What would be cool would be to organize a resistance movement to coordinate everybody all at once as soon as they get their CBDC in their account, to send it all to the IRS, because I doubt they'll have controls on how much you can send there.
You think people even know though that they're using a CBDC? Because I don't think they will.
No, they will.
No.
They're going to tell them.
Well,
come get this Fed dollars.
They might not.
They'll say the bank's crashed, whatever. But don't worry. Download this app, and we're going to send you your helicopter money.
That's what I'm saying. Is I think the bank
helicopter money needs to learn to be refused.
We
need to learn to refuse that shit.
You don't typically touch the dollar. Most people, everything's plastic and wire. So, you might not know, and they might be doing it only between banks, which frankly is less of a concern than if I am holding
they're building it on a proof of authority network. All they need is the people who are signers to decide to change something about it. So there's really nothing you can do to hack it and break it.
And a network for whatever the bank reconciliations and all of the things that they do between banks. I don't really care about that as much. It's all fake. It's all just freaking numbers. They're already doing that anyway. But when they apply it down to what do I want to say? Social something systems. To avoid getting blocked further or anything else that's where
local ESG.
If people are required to use it, that's an issue. And if people are not allowed to use other options,
another big problem is
as well. Those are probably the two main issues,
right? If it's interoperable, then it will quickly become the basis for stable coins, and then we're fucked. Like then it's into the decentralized part of the network, and it becomes a backing for it again.
Stable
as long as we don't
the derivative,
we can get rid of that shit.
Factor.
But
all stable coins.
We want to contaminate in the decentralized world. Actually,
it seems to me that as long as we can avoid, those two situations I just mentioned, where we're required to use X and we're not allowed to use Y. If we can avoid that situation, then we can always build something different and better.
And by the way, something that's noted, at least in our own industry, we should stop referring to them, especially the projects themselves, as stable coins. They're really just fiat pegged coins.
Right. Yeah. Fiat pegged, you're
stable,
right.
But they get
unless you fix a year to that, they're always down money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting.
But I'd rather have a stable coin that was pegged to the value of a Big Mac hamburger or something.
Right. Oh yeah, no, exactly. Exactly.
Gotta get to the Big Mac index.
But it wouldn't be stable then. It just wouldn't lie to you about its worth on its face value.
Yeah. That'd be
amazing.
The value against the dollar would go up and down.
Purchasing power.
But the value itself would be like, no, one of these can always buy a Big Mac wherever you're at.
And that's the thing. If McDonald's were to sell them, that would be great, right?
No, that would be awesome.
McDonald's were to sell
McDonald's is the shit, man.
Big Mac coins. That's literally what they're pegged to. It's very simple, Why not?
You guys know that the World Food Index rates the Dollar McDouble as the world's most nutritious food by cost?
But even there's shrinkflation. Even at McDonald's, that's not even stable.
You can get more of your daily nutrition out of one of those for less money than any other thing.
They every year, and you were talking about Germany a minute ago, and the shrinkflation thing. They have every year a I don't know what they call it, but it's like the top 5 or 10 products. The winners of this award are the ones that basically did something through repackaging it differently, or their packaging by weight changed, but the price remained the same, or they tried to so I just think it's cool. They call it out every year. Here's the products that tried to trick you this year.
Yeah.
Reflexer is also a cool one. Have you guys heard of Reflexer Finance?
No.
They make a token called RAI, R-A-I.
Oh yeah. You told me about that.
It's an unpegged stablecoin. Essentially, it is it's designed to minimize algorithmically movement. but not necessarily towards a specific price. It's always trying to anchor itself to its current price.
Yeah. So it's sort of like,
it just doesn't
makes
move
it less
as heavily.
Yeah, reduces volatility. Doesn't really care about what price it is.
I'd be more interested in coins, and I worked with one group, and we never did anything with it. It was essentially to try to create a more volatile token, that is programmatically volatile on purpose, but you would have to bet on which side, and it was very interesting. But anyway, okay, let's close out. Right. Let me see. I lost my screen here. Let's see here. This week. Okay, so I guess let's just go through. What's going on this week. Where can people keep in touch with you, Dave?
Yeah, so I'm over on Den Social. I'm in the Coffee with Den layer, and I do a show on Wednesday mornings. I do a meetup. I host a meetup every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. That is open to anybody who wants to pop in, and that's where you can catch up with me, and you can always AMA on any of those episodes. You can pop in and ask directly, or you can just leave a note in the replies to that post when I make it over in the Coffee with Den layer. So yeah, if you ever have any questions for me, just swing by the coffee layer and ask it. I'll be around.
Cool.
Greg.
All right. So just wanted to briefly say that the decentralized future actually kind of depends on you. And it depends on all of us deciding to vote with our dollars for systems that resist censorship and that promote freedom of communication. We can resist the systems that prevent us from doing those things, but only if we individually give a damn enough to try. Now there are those of us who are going to build systems, right? Like Den Social or Noster or all the others that are out there doing amazing stuff, right? Those people are going to be there, and they're going to try to capture most of the normies who refuse to play along. But you should try to convince people to play along. You should play along yourself, because this really is the future of humanity that's at stake. So I would encourage you all to if you're going to build something and you're going to do it on ETH or Rivet or ETH or Polygon or ETC, to use Rivet and hit up rivet.cloud, because we can help you get started. So
very good, Lisa.
Yeah, so you can find me in the Mighty Lair on Den and on the New Normal, sometimes on YouTube if they let me. And but that's where, like, when I saw Twitter glitching yesterday, I immediately went to, like, thank God we have Dragon Chain and Den, and we do have those decentralized and free platforms where we can speak freely to our friends and reach out and connect. So that's where I would recommend everybody go sign up, get an account on den.social, and join the Mighty Lair. And I'll see you on Friday, and I'll give you a lot token if you comment.
Excellent. Right on. And I'm Joe. Dave and I were just on a live stream. Was it yesterday? Was it yesterday?
It
with
was.
Odd
I think
App.
it was yesterday.
It was actually really interesting. Quite a
you guys did Super Happy again?
No,
today.
No, this was just this was just a different stream. It's
cool.
NYC Odd App channel.
Send me a link.
I'll tweeted it out, so it was pretty cool. And
Joe, send me a link to that. I want to share that around.
We'll do. And other than that, just the normal things. Follow me on Twitter and Den importantly. And that's it, I guess. The theme for next week is the pros and cons of state governments leveraging blockchain. But make sure you share this episode. The more you share, the more views it gets, the more lot our hosts and topic contributors will receive. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and do whatever else you would do on any of the networks that you might be watching this.
Yep. Click thumbs up, click the alarm bell. That's for sure.
And put in some suggestions for March episodes as well.
And somebody try to say first in the comments if nobody's commented.
Yes.
And learn how to run your own nodes.
Yes. Thanks, guys.
The first tap of a conductor's wand. The first rivet in a mile-high tower. The master link at the genesis of the never-ending chain. The moment a single empty canvas meets a singular master stroke, there is no one thing. Because now, there are many. Because soon, there will be more. Because one is ever the beginning. Like the first link in an infinite chain, or the first rivet in the tallest skyscraper. The master stroke is found in the masterpiece. What will you begin?